Well, good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Headlines. This is the latest edition here from Post and Courier Columbia. I am Andy Shain, managing editor for Post and Courier Columbia. And today we're talking about Bob Caslen. The Post and Courier filed a records request for his emails during the week in May after he made two commencement gaffes. First, he mistakenly called the school the University of California. And then he was caught plagiarizing part of his speech from another commencement address. Those missteps eventually led to his resignation. Suffice to say, the emails we received showed Caslen was not happy about the reaction he was getting to the gaffes. One email that he sent to a fellow college president, said, "This place sucks so bad." And several other emails complained about his treatment over his nearly 2 years at the University of South Carolina. So I called Caslen for comment, and we spoke for over 45 minutes about what he said during that time. And his feelings had not cooled at all over the past 4 months. The retired West Point superintendent said he regretted ever coming to the University of South Carolina. And then we also talked about offering deeper explanations about what happened those nights during the commencement addresses and about his tenure at USC. We're going to go talk about that story today and the fallout from it. I'm here today with Jessica Holdman, the reporter from the Post and Courier Columbia, who co-wrote the story with me. Thank you for being here, Jessica.
Thanks, Andy.
All right. And before we begin, I wanted to let you know that our email addresses, our Twitter handles are going to be in the Zoom chat over to the right of your Zoom screen there. And at any point, you can send us questions, and we'll try to answer some of them at the end of this about what happened with Caslen, what's happening with USC, what's happening with the presidential search. So my first question I want to ask Jessica is that, you helped review nearly 3,800 pages of emails. They came from Caslen. We also asked for them from now interim USC president Harris Pastides, as well as the USC board. What stood out to you about that week?
I think to kind of put things in context, sort of what was leading up to this, we have to keep in mind that we were coming to the end of sort of a graduation round trip of the state. Caslen had been speaking at various graduations at all of the satellite campuses around the state that week, and we were kind of coming to a close with the ceremonies here in Columbia. And I think what really stood out to me was you saw sort of the everyday business of the president's office being conducted early on in the week. You kind of noticed it seemed sort of business as usual leading up to all of this. And then as the weekend progressed, mistakes were made during the speech, and you moved into the days after. You noticed that this really became sort of all-consuming, something that it was very obvious that you weren't going to get away from what had happened in the previous weekend. And so really seeing that progression, I think, is what stood out most to me. You went from handling business related to research projects, helping students with housing questions, to a lot more conversations between Caslen and folks he knew, reaching out to him, asking what happened, showing their support for him, and sort of his responses and how that played out for him the rest of the week.
Another issue that I think has come up, and I've been asked about a couple of times, is just what were we surprised about the tone? How Bob was reacting in those days, because he made the mistakes over the weekend, and then there were about 3 or 4 days before he resigned, and most of his during that time, what we were reporting or what we found was he was very angry. He called this the most hostile environment he'd ever been in. This is a man who served 43 years in the Army, had been to Afghanistan, had been to Iraq, and he was calling this a hostile place. And honestly, as someone who's covered Bob Caslen since the search for Harris Pastides' successor took place in 2019, I honestly wasn't too surprised. I knew that he was not always happy with the reaction that he had here. He was not a president with a traditional background that normal university presidents have, that PhD, that research. Just having worked at a college for decades usually is the prerequisite of running a major university. He didn't really have any of that. He'd come from from being the superintendent at West Point for 5 years, which I think that the board and that some other leaders in the state saw as somebody who could help reform the school, who could help streamline the school a little bit, somebody who didn't come from that background. But it seemed like that Bob Caslen always really took his detractors. He heard them much louder than he ever heard his supporters. And as Jessica mentioned, I mean, one of the things we did see in the email was a lot of support for Bob Caslen. When he first apologized for the plagiarism, and then when he resigned, there was a lot of support. But really what he saw was the sort of a very vocal group and probably really honestly a vocal minority of people who thought he wasn't quite qualified for the job or the right fit. So I really wasn't too surprised about that at all. Though I did think it was interesting that he put those in emails that were, of course, something that we could get through a public records request, and also something that could be easily shared with others, even if somebody chose to do that. So it's interesting. And again, as another very quick bit of background in case you haven't know the story, is that Bob Caslen was initially, there was not a selection among the 4 finalists that included Bob Caslen. He was elected on a second round of voting after lobbying from Governor Henry McMaster. And so again, he kind of started off in that position, and with a good group of folks on campus, could never seem to get out of that hole. So there we have it. So my next question to you, Jessica, is, you saw in these emails, again, I talked about that period between when the University of California mistake was made, the plagiarism was sort of discovered, and there were several days before he decided to resign on May 12th. What was it that you were seeing, or maybe kept him around, or maybe didn't, either A, he didn't quit immediately, or B, maybe that there wasn't this push, I guess, or there wasn't a successful push to get him out the door, maybe that Monday or that Tuesday?
Sure. I think sort of what we saw was there was some outreach from some Board of Trustees members, particularly after the slip when he referred to it as the University of California rather than South Carolina. That this was something that they could get past. This was just a simple mistake. The next day, then, as the plagiarism allegations surfaced, you saw some outreach from faculty saying this apology that had been sent out had helped. There were still concerns, but it had helped. And you see outreach from just faculty in general saying, you've done a good job. We'll get through this. And because you apologized and took ownership for this, people feel ready to forgive you. But I think what got wrapped up was sort of the handling of his offers to resign with the board, and you kind of fall into a situation where those voices just became too loud, and they were left in a situation where they felt like they had lost the trust.
So as I said, after all of this, one of the, logically what you do is, of course, call people involved in the story. I wanted to call Bob Caslen and see what he wanted to say about what he said in May. And if also you're wondering also why it's such a delay, it just took a while to get these records. It always takes weeks to redact information. The university is particularly sensitive because it has to follow certain rules under FERPA. So it took a little longer to get these documents than maybe it would have otherwise. But that said, I called Bob Caslen. I'm going to be honest, I probably expected that he would no comment, but we ended up talking. We have talked in the past. As I said, I have sort of been with this since the beginning, and we ended up talking for, as I said, well over 45 minutes. And one of the things I learned is, of course, is that he is still was extremely mad about how he felt he was treated at the university. Again, whether you think it's fair or not is obviously up to you as a member of the USC community, as readers, of course, as citizens of South Carolina and such. But he still felt that unfairness, and I asked him a little bit about what happened. Why did he say the University of California? What happened with the plagiarism? And he's on the University of California. He said simply that it was just he was exhausted, that he was that it was a long May night. It was at the end of a nearly 3-hour commencement address. He was also distracted by he said the graduates in front of him, many of whom were leaving as they were getting their diplomas. They were talking. They were trying to talk to their family members in the stands at Williams-Brice Stadium, and so he just was just a little bit. He said, just made a simple slip. He insisted that he was not drunk, which has been sort of a question out there. Was he drunk? And he again, even in the emails, again, on those accusations, was trying to rebut all of that. I have not heard from my sources at all that they thought he was drunk. And some people said he kind of talks, mumbles and slurs a little bit. Honestly, that's kind of how he talks sometimes. And so again, I wasn't there. I can't say obviously anything for sure, but again, based on at least what he was saying, he said he hadn't been drinking that night. As far as the plagiarism goes, he said simply he wanted to sort of add something to his commencement address that got at sort of the perseverance and the fortitude that students and faculty had shown during the COVID pandemic. He picked this quote from Admiral William McRaven, and wanted to add it in. He sort of has a book of inspirational quotes. He gave it to a speechwriter. Unfortunately, the citation was never handed to the speechwriter, and he said it, and as we know, sort of off everything went. Bob was very careful in the emails to say, I'm not going to blame the speechwriter for this. I take ownership of this. But in my interview with him, he said, well, it is the role of a speechwriter to make sure that everything is sort of on the up and up in a speech, even if I gave it to them. So, there was a little bit of yes, but with that. And so, but at the same time, he said it. McRaven even sent him an email. Again, this was in the emails saying that you don't owe me an apology. It is fine. In fact, he said he was honored that Bob had included his quote in his address. But that said, the damage was done. And as we all know, what happened is what happened eventually after 4 days of just constant criticism online. And obviously in some of the emails that we saw as well, Bob Caslen decided to resign, midweek after the weekend of commencement, and he was gone by that Thursday. So I wasn't terribly surprised that he was still mad. He has been sort of mad since the beginning, and it just kind of carried on through. At this point, we're moving forward. And speaking of moving forward, we're going to move forward to your questions. I'm going to actually ask Jessica. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go out of order from what we were talking about. There's a question in our Q&A that I want to go ahead and address first. And the question is from an anonymous attendee. So normally they want us to say their names, but Mr. and Mrs. Anonymous will answer it for you. To what extent might Caslen's comments harm the presidential search? Jessica, why don't you go ahead and take that first? What do you think the impact might be on a presidential search with this kind of thing being said and out there?
Sure. So I think the comments that he made and the impact on the search is that you do have a president who is talking about the environment that he was working in, and it could very well have an impact on candidates as they're looking at the University of South Carolina and trying to decide whether this is something they wish to pursue. This working environment is something they're going to have to take into consideration. And so it very well could have an impact in that sense. If someone is worried about being put in a similar situation that, as Caslen had said, he felt was hostile. And I think we also have to keep in mind that we're going into the search process at the same time that a lot of other universities are as well. So you're also looking at a very competitive job market at the same time.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. One of the things that I understand from COVID is that a lot of university presidents who were sort of on the cusp of wanting to leave COVID kind of pushed them over the edge. Of course, it was sort of double duty to try to navigate getting students back on campus, dealing with that, keeping revenue up, and then of course getting students back on campus safely. So there apparently are a lot of openings. It's going to be competitive. I'm sure this isn't going to, obviously isn't the best, obviously advertisement for USC, but at the same time, one of the things I have often heard from people, and this is that this is a Bob Caslen issue. And that in the end, Bob Caslen was unique because, again, we're talking about a 3-star Army general who had run West Point, not your traditional academic. And it was not a situation where he clashed with the board over X, or he clashed with a football coach or that kind of thing. That it was really a situation where he was, it was a plagiarism situation where there were a lot of people who said you should get a punishment that a student should get. So, it'll be interesting to see if again, the academic community kind of dismisses that. And also, we understand that to a certain degree, Harris Pastides is trying to help recruit people. He was the president here for 11 years. He had been on a lot of large organizations. And again, I think there's probably a good chance that he'll be able to help people explain the situation here if they have any questions about what's going on here. Which kind of segues into another question, and this is a question that's being addressed both in our Q&A, which, by the way, again, if you have a question, you can go ahead and go to that Q&A section and send us one. But we had several from beforehand, as well as I'm now seeing in our queue, about sort of the structure of the board, just basically the nature of it. And for those who don't know, the Board of Trustees at the University of South Carolina is elected by the legislature. They're elected by the judicial circuits across the state. There are 2 appointments that the governor makes as well. And of course, there's some standing positions such as those held for the superintendent of education and the alumni and the head of the Alumni Association and the head of the Faculty Senate. But that said, it's mostly obviously a creature of the legislature. Do you have a sense, or have you been hearing at all, Jessica, a sense that is there going to be a movement to try to reform the board, or at least trying to get the board to maybe be a little less involved in some things?
Sure. I think one major effort that came out of it stretches back as far as Bob Caslen's hiring process. We saw in that situation where actually the governor had enacted some influence and had put some pressure on some board members to consider Caslen. And this came after he was not even in the finalist group of candidates, and they were going to relaunch the search and try and find some more folks. And with that political pressure, it gained the attention of some of the college accreditors and actually resulted in a slap on the wrist for the university. In response to that, they launched into a reform effort to change how they will handle presidential search processes in the future. That included a remake of the search committee. I think where we are in that process, they have recently put out their idea of a job description, what they're looking for in the next president. And you do see in there that they're looking for someone with an academic background. So in that sense, while you still have Board of Trustees members serving on this panel, the makeup is different. They have also put into place, again, this is a little bit of self-policing. So there is a question about how it might play out, but there are some self-policing measures in there about reporting if they are receiving any kind of pressure from outside or political influences.
And I think that's a very fair point, Jessica. The idea that this search committee has really made a point of saying we've learned the lessons from the last one, which was honestly they became fairly fixated on bringing Caslen in once his name was in the pool, because I think they were impressed with the idea of getting a former West Point superintendent, a former general here at the university to help with military contracts, of course, to maybe bring in someone with not a traditional background to maybe look at the university in a different way than the people with a traditional background had been. But at the same time, it kind of, maybe kind of didn't get the best candidates and get the pool of folks. Of course, we didn't have a female finalist among the four. We had one person of color, well, Bill Tate, who of course ended up becoming the provost and then now going to Louisiana State University. In fact, it's interesting to always remember that the week before this was when Bill Tate got the job at LSU. So it's certainly interesting to see this process. We're going to they started it also a lot earlier than the process. They started to search for Bob Caslen in 2019. This process didn't start until almost November. We now of course started this. The university has now started this since the spring, and the idea is to look to get somebody in place by the end of the school year, so that they can start for the next school year. They've also pledged that they will have a diverse pool of finalists, and that if they don't have it, they'll start again. So it'll be interesting to see again if they are able to get a female, to get more than four females, to get people of color, to get any sort of more diversity in that group before they choose a new president to succeed Bob Caslen. We've had several questions on basically this issue, and I'm sort of sometimes going to be summarizing a little bit of what people are asking, and these are some great questions, which is, what does this mean for Henry McMaster? Henry McMaster, as I said, lobbied the trustees after Bob Caslen was passed over the first time in 2019. His lobbying did lead to sort of a wrist slap, for lack of a better term, by creditors for meddling, even though technically the governor is a member of the board. He appoints a designee. Usually the governor does not attend the meetings. In fact, I think there may have been only one example that anybody could remember in recent memory of a sitting governor attending a USC meeting. At the same time, it's being asked what's for him, and as someone who's covered politics in South Carolina for some time, I think it's a blip, honestly. In the end, I don't think anybody could have predicted how Bob Caslen would have performed. One thing we have not mentioned here, of course, is what Bob Caslen did for the university that was one wide praise for him. He handled the COVID. He's praised for handling the COVID outbreak. USC was the first school to close its campus, was one of the first schools to reopen its campus. He had plans in place for testing and for quarantining students who were sick, and dealing with faculty, trying to get the classrooms reopened back last year before we had the vaccine and there was distancing. He also made a point of diversity hiring, especially in the administration, doing a little bit more on that. He also, was starting to work to win some more research contracts, more military-related contracts, which, again, tend to be lucrative and also tend to put a spotlight on the university, try to up its research game. He was trying efforts to bolster minority recruitment for students and for faculty. So there were some things that he was in the process of doing, some of which, of course, got halted with COVID, some of which, are things that take time. He was also moving the school to more of an online program, which a lot of people see as the future for both revenue and for academics. So there were some things that he was doing, but at the same time, he seemed, as the emails and really as my interview with him suggested, very, very focused on the people who were not with him and who were criticizing him for all sorts of reasons, whether it was they just didn't think he was qualified, whether he had done something that he felt was a slight, or just maybe he didn't handle a situation that people didn't like. He seemed very focused again on those negative voices, and in the end, that's what finally said for him to say, "I've had enough," and to give up. And in the end, while Henry McMaster backed him on that, I think Bob Caslen was his own man and did his own thing, and it was on his way. But in the end, I think when it comes to Henry McMaster's reelection campaign, it'll be out there, but I'm not sure it's going to be as big as other issues as his opponents will throw at him moving forward. Here's another thing. Again, another form of questions that we seem to be getting in the queue. And again, if you have any questions, please send them in. Is that essentially, did Bob Caslen sort of tank himself? Do you have any sense, again, reading the emails, that he made these gaffes on purpose, did the plagiarism on purpose so that he could leave? He was unhappy here. Let me find a way to get out. Did you see any indication of that in the emails?
I really don't think there was any indication that these were mistakes made on purpose. I think they really were just that. They were mistakes. And I think that indicated in the fact that he was working on a lot of these initiatives. Like we talked about, there was at least the research project that was being talked about. There was finalization of the online program, and with that, the partnership that came with Major League Soccer. So a lot of those things that he had been working toward, you still saw progress being made. At least that's what emails indicated. And so I really don't think this was anything that was done on purpose.
Jessica, generally, Michael is asking, how is he seen sort of by rank and file students and rank and file faculty? You know what I mean? Obviously, we know we generally hear from leaders, we generally hear from deans and things along those lines. But do you have a sense at all of how he was viewed by students and faculty in general?
Sure. I think a few things that stood out to me from the emails that poured in were it really seemed like he took a one-on-one approach with students when they had problems. We see emails from students who participated in his morning workout programs that he did. We see emails from parents thanking him for personally taking the time to help their student with a housing issue or issues getting into a certain class. And then you also see this outpouring of support from a lot of staff and faculty in the days after, saying, hey, you really did a good job getting us through this. We wouldn't be in the same place we are now if it wasn't for your leadership through COVID. And really stepping up and saying, please don't leave. You've shown tremendous leadership, and we don't want you to go. Of course, you also saw emails to the contrary, but I think a large part of what you saw from students and parents and faculty members was of support. You even had one parent offer to write a letter of recommendation to the Board of Trustees that he be allowed to stay.
And again, it was, I think the thing I have taken away from this is that he talked often about hostile, toxic atmosphere. He talked about it in the emails. He talked about also how his wife felt it was a hostile, toxic atmosphere. And for those who followed his sons on Twitter, that was certainly a reflection of the rest of his family. And what I always found surprising, what I will always find surprising about Bob Caslen is that, as I said, those very loud negative voices boomed much louder than all of those very positive, supportive voices to him. I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm not, my sister's a psychologist. I'm not. So, it's for him to answer. But that's what again, seeing all this and seeing the kind of support he was getting, it really makes me wonder about that. But that said, there was a very vocal group that did not like what he was doing, that did not think he needed to be in the job. And in the end, of course, when he made the mistakes, they all came out of the woodwork. And to a certain degree, Bob also said that trustees, and don't forget, he was voted by an 11-8 vote. He said trustees who were against him, who had kind of started to embrace him, ran away when the plagiarism was discovered and all of that. And to a certain degree, one of the last things he said to me was, I asked him, well, what would you say to someone who's looking at the University of South Carolina, who's looking at to succeed you? And the first thing he said was, just take a look at the experience I had and try to figure out, why am I saying this is the most hostile place I've ever been to, when I have been to all these bases, all these cities, all these towns, all of these countries in my career. This is by far a much different place than I'd ever been in before. And I do wonder a little bit about that the difference between being in the Army, being not in the Army, and dealing, of course, with the idea that about the amount of control you have. I just think that's going to be kind of an interesting thing. Last question, and we'll deal with it. We'll wrap up. And again, if you have any questions, comments, you can feel free to reach out to Jessica and myself. Our email addresses are in the chat. Also, they're pretty easy to find. We try not to hide the ability to contact us. But what role Darla Moore played in this, and to remind again, in case you weren't following, a few weeks before this, Darla Moore's father had passed away, and they the university neglected immediately to send condolences and that kind of thing. And it was Clemson did. It was kind of a little bit of a brouhaha. Jessica, looking at the emails, did that come up on occasion? The whole idea of this idea of missing the death of a parent of a major donor to the university, and of course her reaction to it, which was not very positive. She was actually herself very angry about the fact that the university missed it.
From my recollection, it might have come up maybe once, but it really did not seem to be as much of an issue brought forward in the emails as it was when the initial slight happened.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a lot of layers here and a lot to unravel as we go ahead, and obviously we'll be sort of following along too, again, on the impact of this on the presidential search and on the university as it moves forward. But I want to thank, first of all, Jessica for being with us today. I want to thank everyone else for participating today, for sending us some good questions, either before the session or during the session, or just watching and obviously hearing what we had to sort of our thoughts on what happened with the story and our reporting of this very important story. I want a reminder that when you signed up for this Beyond the Headlines, you'll get an email with a link to the video of this chat. For anyone who might have missed it, it'll be on the YouTube page for the Post and Courier, probably in about a day. This is usually the part where I just talk a little bit about the work we do. First of all, to support the work that Jessica, that myself, our colleagues here in Columbia, our colleagues in Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Greenville, Spartanburg, all the work that we do. You know how you support it? You subscribe. And by subscribing, we're not doing things as much with ads. The way we get money, the way I get to pay my mortgage, and Jessica gets to obviously pay for her life is for you to pay for our work, because again, that's what allows us to do it. So we are offering a deal of $4 for 4 months. If you want to go ahead and try us out, please look at it. If you also, I want to take this opportunity to promote our newsletters. We here in the Columbia office, we have about 5 or 6 newsletters, everything from a daily headlines to food to weekend business, all sorts of great things. So they're free. You can get them. It's a great way to sort of see what we're doing each day, each week. And of course, the Post and Courier overall has a number of great newsletters, everything from the military to climate issues. So I would suggest browsing and taking those. Again, hey, they're free, try them. And also to follow what we're doing, especially here in Columbia, please go to postandcourier.com/Columbia. Again, thank you for participating today. Thank you for watching. And thank you, most of all, for reading the Post and Courier. Have a good day, everybody.